Hello, I'm glad you're here and welcome to the Game-Conomist Podcast. We apologize for no episode last week. My team and I were moving into university at the same time, and if we rushed an episode, it would have been probably niche. So we decided to push it back to this week instead. So we hope you can forgive us. But anyway, we have a lot to go over this week with the ruling on Apple versus Epic Games, as well as Nvidia's shocking profit margins and EA getting some hefty fines in Australia, and much more. As always, thank you so much for tuning in, and let's get right into it. We covered the Epic Games versus Apple story a few weeks ago in this podcast, but if you missed it, don't worry, I'll briefly review it for you. Basically, Epic Games had released Fortnite on the App Store back in 2020, but quickly removed it because of Apple's revenue strategy. Apple has been charging all apps on their App Store a 30% commission on all sales made in the game. That includes cosmetics, extra content, and pretty much anything else you can charge for in a video game. Epic Games thought this was too predatory and sued Apple, and Apple's defense was that they provided exceptions to, quote, small developers, and can reduce it down to 15 to 20%, and that they have every right to charge that much since they manage and upkeep the games on the store and also process all the payments through their servers. However, when Epic Games proposed the option to manage their own transactions using their own services, Apple struck it down and says it goes against their own policies. More problems arose for Apple when over 1,000 indie developers sued them in the UK for over $1 billion over the same issues as Epic Games had. The lawsuit is still ongoing, but the one against Epic Games went to the Supreme Court, which ruled that Apple has, quote, every right to charge that much for their services, as well as them being allowed to reprieve app developers if they try to use a third-party transaction system. Basically ruling in favor for Apple to keep the 30% charge and allowing them to heavily punish anyone if they use their own way of collecting money for their game. And it's important to remember that Apple last quarter reported $23 billion in profits from their App Store alone. And if they were suddenly forbidden from using that strategy again, their stock and profit margins would have dropped significantly. Epic Games has declined to comment on the ruling, and Apple did as well. But this is a pretty big win for Apple, as they can now disclose and use this case as reference in case anybody else were to try to sue them for the same problem. And while Apple is safe in the US now regarding their practices, in the UK the case is still ongoing, and we'll keep you updated on it as it continues. Last week, we talked about Nvidia and their newest software, as well as their GPU upgrades now, including a special AI component. This week, though, they've announced their new innovative component called the H100 AI Accelerator. Now, if you are unfamiliar with an AI accelerator, it's a pretty expensive piece of hardware designed to speed up AI computation times using the least real estate of the hardware you're running on. For instance, if you were to run a custom AI on your phone, it might be pretty slow without an accelerant, since it has to call on your base hardware rather than specific pieces built just for the AI. Now, this new H100 accelerator was estimated by a financial firm to cost around $3,320 to produce, and Nvidia announced last week that they will be selling it for around $25,000 to $30,000, depending on how many are sold in bulk. Either way, that's a 1,000% profit margin on each unit sold, setting the record in the tech industry for the highest profits for a piece of hardware ever produced. Since this announcement of the new AI accelerator, Nvidia's stock has jumped 7%, and at the time of writing this sits at around $433. This accelerator is also one of a kind, and AMD, a competing tech company, has yet to announce anything similar. Now, throughout these past weeks, Nvidia has seemingly been experimenting with more hardware and software and has found themselves innovating the field of AI with their products. AMD, the competitor, however, is stuck to the basics with CPU and graphics cards, and while don't get me wrong, they're still very high quality products, you're still not seeing them really ever beat Nvidia in the tech field, especially after the recent news with Nvidia. AMD is currently sitting at $104, but at the beginning of 2023 was at $60, so the strides they've made with their cards have been proven pretty efficient. Now, there has been some recent news of AMD and the graphics cards, but we'll get to that later. For now, we'll focus on Nvidia and its promising future in the AI hardware field, And if I were you, I would definitely keep an eye on them in these next coming months, and we'll keep you informed on who Nvidia is selling to, as well as maybe other releases they're coming out with. EA and Sony recently have been ordered to pay $11,800 to each gamer who bought the FIFA Ultimate Team Pack in Australia because the pack violated gambling laws. This court ruling was in an Australian lower court, which was on a case-by-case basis and doesn't reference other cases. And this is important to understand, as EA has faced a multitude of lawsuits regarding their monetary systems breaking gambling laws in a multitude of countries. The system was famously coined by gamers as the quote loot box or gotcha system after Overwatch released something called loot boxes, where you pay money and get 4 random items from the box. This started becoming a popular monetary strategy for game developers, as you can make the players pay for items they may not have wanted and keep them paying until they get what they want. Now, there is an ethical discussion on whether or not this should be allowed, but governments got involved when complaints of some things you get from these loot box systems could provide a competitive advantage against other players. Now, Overwatch avoided something like this because the items from their loot boxes were purely cosmetic and didn't provide any advantage. However, EA's FIFA games do have a system where you can purchase packs and get random players from each pack, but some players are better than others in the game. So, to put it in the context, let's say you and your friend purchase a pack from the FIFA shop. You and your friend would get different players, and your friend may get better players than you, even though you both paid the same amount of money for the content. Now, because of this, players started to sue game companies that offered that monetary system from around the world, and many countries had different solutions. America decided that while the system was deceptive, it doesn't count as gambling per se, so no action was taken. And China actually encouraged this type of strategy and insisted that games show at least a % chance for each item they can get before players purchase the packs or loot boxes. As for most of Europe, they have not come to the conclusion yet on whether or not loot boxes are gambling. But in Australia, a court decided that the loot box technique was gambling and that EA must fork over payments to players who purchased any packs. EA responded to this decision by saying, quote, "We disagree with the court's decision and believe it got both the facts and law wrong in this case," end quote. Now, I don't believe this will affect anything long term, but it's good to keep in mind that EA has not decided to discontinue this strategy and could face more lawful repercussions as time goes on. Advanced Micro Devices, more commonly known as AMD, recently confirmed their new set of desktop CPU chips. Codenamed Granite Ridge, this new series of chips is slated to release early 2024. Due to high demand with their silicon development partner in Taiwan, Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, or TSMC, as more commonly known, AMD will not be using their latest 3nm process and will probably stick to the 4nm process for their new chip series. This new architecture, called Zen 5 by AMD, will still have gains over the previous generation, Zen 4, as the architecture and its respective 7000 series CPU chips were made on a 5nm process. This new Zen 5 architecture will also be the host for a new series of APU desktop chips known as Phoenix Point laptop chips and Strix Point laptop chips, as well as a Threadripper chip, Shimada Point, and a high and low power mobile chip codenamed Fire Range and Escher respectively. Now, if you're unsure what this means, basically it means these chips are going to be more powerful and have a lot more depth to them than previous releases. And we're unsure at this time if the new set of desktop CPUs will have a designation of 8000 or 9000 series, but all hosted on the TSMC's 4nm process, these chips will mark the next step in computer performance, and I would keep an eye on both AMD and TSMC in the coming months. As always, thank you so much for tuning in this week, and again, we apologize for no episode last week, but we hope to make it up to you for this week, and we'll try not to do that anymore. If you have any questions or concerns, please email us, and do check out the stocks we've talked about today. I think this week was a very important episode, And we'll be back next week to give you more information and updating everything in regards to everything games, economics, and esports. Thank you again so much, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.